Well, Lent is said to be a whole lot of different things. What I invite us in this particular season in 2020 to focus on over these next weeks is a paring down. An intention to remove some of the distraction and clutter that we might be able to connect with the core of our deepest longing. Our longing to be in relationship with one another, with the Creator, with the creation. So we just heard that presentation of that sort of culturally well-known piece of scripture from Genesis 2 and 3. And in order to really be able to hear it, sometimes we have to do some spring cleaning with some of these passages. We need to maybe scrub off some of the goop of interpretive history. And so to actually peel away, to scrub away some of the generations of layers of male dominant, Eurocentric, privileged, body-shaming readings of such a text. So I invite you, get out your imaginary scrub brushes. Scrub first away the notion that any of this is anything but a beautiful, poetic myth. John Dominic Crossan is famous for saying, the ancient people told beautiful, metaphoric stories with deep truth that were smart. And we were dumb enough to take them literally. Get out your scrub brushes. Scrub away the idea that this story is foundationally about original sin. Obviously, the characters in this story made decisions. And nowhere in the story does it talk about sin. Some have actually called the action of the humans in the garden as original blessing, and it's partly true. There is gift and consequence in their action. The story is as much about a description of the human condition as it is any moral prescription. The serpent is actually right. They do not die when they eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But what they do is become aware of their mortality. Scrub some more. The layers of the story's interpretation that point to shame sexuality. Certainly there is an awareness of sensuality in the garden, and nakedness and sexuality, but the horrid consequences that turn out in the end of the story are not passed on because they have sex. The story plays with many different kinds of longing. The verb in the Hebrew, yada, to know intimately, includes to know sexually. But what a beautiful thing it is for us to be able to know in that way, physically and with our souls, touching sacred wonder in finding a balance between our sensuality and our vulnerability when we find ourselves in relationships, equitable, consensual, and intimate. Scrub some more. Get those brushes out. Scrub away the woman-hating readings that have been layered upon this story. Now, in truth, in comparison to the first creation story in Genesis 1, it is tilted toward gender inequity. There's no question about it. And yet, what if we read Eve in this story, not as weak, not as a temptress, but creative, aware, curious, adventuresome. If you think about it, the Adam in this story is really the dolt. He does whatever Eve does, and then to do. The woman is the most attentive in interaction with creation. Tastes the fruit, talks to the serpent, notices the beauty of the tree. She, in this creation story, is the first theologian who's already interpreted this command of God not eat. She also says, don't touch. So we could go on with this exercise all day. Maybe we've gone far enough at least to begin to recover the healing and insightful possibilities of our reading this today. As we all come of age, we become self-conscious. We separate our identity from the identities of those who have nurtured us as children. How powerful it is for us to discover that we have a say. We decide to choose to freely and creatively express our relationship with the sacred, with each other, with the creation. And I can't imagine the Holy Mystery wanting it or expecting it any other way. And yet, when we lose some of our sense of innocence, we get in touch that we will die. And that our actions do have consequences. I marvel especially at the part of the story where it says God comes walking in the breeze of the evening, and the human one does what? Hides behind a tree, not wanting to have noticed this new awareness of nakedness. It's not like the Creator suddenly finds out, oh, they're naked. God knows our nakedness, our fecklessness, our adventuresomeness, our insatiability. God says to the earth creature, you wanted to be like me. How's that going for you? It seems like it might be too much. I already see the chill bumps on your naked skin. And then the fig leaf. Oh, what a beautiful image. The sewn together fig leaf. We understand it in some deep archetypal ways, don't we? Maybe we hide behind our striving for perfection. Maybe if I keep trying to be perfect, God won't notice my imperfections. Or maybe we hide our vulnerability behind wanting to always be helpful to everybody else. Or maybe we hide behind our performing and then performing some more. Maybe we hide behind wanting to be special. Or maybe we hide behind this just letting our fears overtake us and we don't venture out because, it's just too risky. Or maybe we hide behind keeping a distance and acting as if we are the omniscient observer and our vulnerability cannot be touched. Or maybe we hide behind always some new thing, some entertainment. We hide by our consumption, by our work sometimes, by needing to get to the gym, by the things that numb our pain. Or maybe we hide behind our anger, as if we put out that angry flame. Maybe nobody can ever hurt us. The fig leaf makes us sort of laugh, because we are so darn good at sewing together fig leaves in all of our unique ways of living out our personalities. But here's the good news, my friends. God invites us to walk with God rather than to hide from God, rather to hide from ourselves. God allows us to live out our consequences, to live out the decisions that we have made, and yet at the same time continues to seek us, continues to call for us in the chill of the night, wherever we're hiding, and then accepts us in all of our deepest vulnerability. Why do you need fig leaves, God asks. In a strange sort of way, the Holy One calls us out of situations we've made so complicated back to a sense of innocence, because God sees in each of us our innocence even when we can no longer see it ourselves. We are always God's babies. We're always God's babies, no matter how tough or involved we pretend to be. And it's not true just for us as individuals, it's true for humanity too, isn't it? Perhaps it was inevitable that humans would notice, oh, these wild grains, they drop seeds, and then those seeds sprout, and then we could do that too. Or we could lure animals into captivity, and we could begin to domesticate those animals. Or we discover fire, and it unleashes an enormous amount of access for humans of nutrients. Maybe it was inevitable that someday we would find that fossil fuels could actually give us energy, or that binary code could do all of these things, or that currency and money could be used in exchange and create urban civilization. Maybe it was inevitable, we don't know. But what we know we cannot do is stuff all of these discoveries, all of this knowledge back into a box, in all of its opportunity and giftedness. But the real question for us today is, could we return to a second sort of innocence? Not naivety, by returning to yesteryear with all of its oppressions, but returning to an appreciation of our right place in creation and our right place in interdependence with each other. Because we know we've used the gifts of knowledge and technology very often to separate from each other, to create enormous wealth and deep poverty, to separate our brains from our bodies and our spirit from our things and our business from our church, separate and oppress and to have power over. So it's not that these discoveries, this knowledge in and of itself is evil or sinful or dirty. It's just how we have navigated the consequences of our wanting to be like God in all of its creativity and wonder and choices. So we have to confess that, well, we've not always done so well on that count. And those are the consequences described in this myth of being forced out of the garden and toiling with sweat and encountering thistle and thorn and encountering pollution and asthma and coronavirus and war and torture, and you can name it all. So in this story, I hear for us today embedded an urgent call to bring things together. Because we know, if we know anything, in all of our quest for knowing, if we know anything at this point, we know that we cannot live alone. So just a couple of stories that have inspired me, and there are lots of stories. And because Pat Eisenach is here, we've got to tell this story. You know, there's a small, slow movement moving across the Midwest, not significantly, but in little places. It's pretty much part of the curriculum of elementary school students in the Midwest to grow milkweed and to learn about monarch butterflies and their amazing journey to these pockets of firs in Mexico. That arduous journey, and then coming back into this part of North America and laying their eggs and laying them on milkweed, and then devouring as caterpillars 2,000 times their birth weight just on milkweed. And these school children come home to their parents who are soybean and corn farmers in Illinois and Iowa and southern Minnesota. And they, with big eyes and excitement, talk about the journey of the monarch, the wonder of the monarch. And they probably also say, did you know, Mom? Did you know, Dad? Did you know, Grandpa? Did you know, Uncle? That most monarchs, when they're looking for milkweed, they look for milkweed as as adjacent to corn and soybean fields. They have a preference for that. In fact, they lay more eggs when it's around corn and soybeans. We don't know why, but 90% of monarchs have disappeared because the milkweed has disappeared because of Roundup. So there are some of those farmers who are losing sleep because they've got debt. And the roller coaster of commodity prices, and these trade wars, and these droughts and these floods, and they don't know what to do. They want to have shoes for these kids to go to school. And yet they listen. And because they want their children throughout their lives to experience monarchs, are beginning to set aside little sections of that valuable farmland to grow milkweed and wildflowers and grasses just because of that relationship. There are some guys in a town in India, Akura. They know that their city is choking on single-use plastic. And they also know that so many rag collectors in that community have no food. They go hungry. So what do? They opened up garbage cafe. They say, you collect and you bring us 1 kilo of plastic that you find on the streets and in the byways. You bring it here, and you can have basmati rice and dal, all of the things that we have to offer in exchange, and a safe place to build a community. And we'll use that plastic that's now building roads through swampy areas. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot greener than asphalt. And what do they have over their door? More waste, better taste. So obviously we cannot return to the Garden of Eden, but we can return to the beauty of the simpler and slower things that still hold significant power, give us life and hope. When we hide less behind the stuff that pretends our immortality, we discover our humanity. And the Spirit draws us to bring things ever so slowly but significantly back together. And there, in each of these spaces, God awaits us in all of our knowledge, but also in all of our